I started working as a senior at Battle Creek Central, Go Bearcats, which is just right down the road from the Federal Center. It was in 1980, the fall of 1980, and my business teacher asked me if I was interested in perhaps qualifying for a student aid position at the Federal Center, and it was called the Stay in School program. It was for at-risk youth from lower income families, and I qualified, and history was written. So I've been here ever since. I worked as I graduated from Central, and then because I started working here, I was able to afford to pay my way through to the local community college and got my associate's degree. And so then after that, I took the civil service test, and I started working full-time in 1984, the spring of 1984. I was hired into the newly formed contracting directorate, and I think I was the 5th person hired. So it's been a pleasure seeing contracting grow and working in every office and position within J7. When I first started, we had just a few hazardous waste contracts. I think we had like 5 nationwide ones, and now we have 86 global hazardous waste contracts. We also did sealed bidding. Now we do negotiated contracts, and I believe it was under President Clinton at the time. It was called the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act. That was a very comprehensive acquisition reform that made our jobs easier and more efficient. We provided more value to the taxpayers and then ultimately to our customers. It introduced, tailing off of that, the government purchase card, which has made a lot of buys more streamlined and easier to get those everyday type supplies. Well, the significance is when we first started, those few that we had, those were just within the United States, and they were riddled with litigation. And the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which was like the big granddaddy environmental law, was fairly new too. So we were learning as we grew. Now we provide worldwide hazardous waste coverage to customers, anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000 generators of hazardous waste at any one time. We've become a lot more efficient and streamlined. When I first started, we did not have, say for example, regulations at our fingertips online. We had hard copy FARs and DFARs, and we were constantly waiting for the mail to come in for any acquisition changes. And then as a procurement tech, I was one of those people that I had to file all the new regulatory changes and advise the staff of, okay, we've got a FAR update. How does this, then they in turn, it would impact the contracts and what provisions and clauses that you put in. Also, going back to like hazardous waste contracting, we had approved qualified disposal facilities and transporters that our contractors had to use that we had fully vetted, and that were considered compliant and good to go to use. Whereas today that's all online, and our contracting officer representatives can check to ensure that those transporters and disposal facilities where the waste is intended for is qualified. Before, we had to do all of that by hand. For every proposal, whenever we had a solicitation closing, the offers would submit hard copy packages, and sometimes their proposals would be like that thick. And as one of the first receivers of those proposals as a procurement technician, I would go through there and pull out any disposal facilities that they were proposing for use, any proposed transporters, and supporting documentation such as licenses. And then I would give that to the contract specialist and officer, and then that was shared with the environmentalist. And so it was a drawn-out, lengthy process to manually check everything. Also, our bid schedules on contracts could average anywhere from 150 up to, say, 300 line items, or CLINs that we call them. And we had our calculators out, and I was having to run, we called it running tapes, and I was having to verify every CLIN and unit price, and then ensure that there was no mistakes in the offer's proposal. Now everything's done Excel, and with some summary citations, you get your response very quickly. So we've seen the manpower, with the less people to do more that had to do manual functions are now doing more with less, actually, and it's thanks to the internet and the tools. Aside just from contracting, but it definitely impacted contracting. It impacted everybody here in the disposition services. Back then it was called Defense Property Disposal Service. When I started, we had typewriters. And since I was in the administrative field, every document that we had to type had certain color copy carbons behind it, and we could not make errors. And if you did, we had our little pencils with the blue eraser and the little brush at the end, and we had to correct each and every one. We did not have computers. We did not have desktops. We did not have multi-devices that copied and printed. As a matter of fact, every other floor here in the building, and we had one copier every other floor. And so people like me, I was a student at the time, the offices always sent the students. And so we would stand in line sometimes a half hour, 45 minutes just to copy. And the machine would always break down. And one funny story is the machine that I dreaded is the one closest to my office. And it was always breaking down. And one day I went to use it, and we were in a hurry to get something, and there was a wreath that said "Rest in Peace" on it. It had officially died finally. So, but then along the way, we woke up and got modern, and each directorate at that time had what we call a 4-phase computer. And it was one computer per directorate, and you had to sign up for time to even get on there to learn it and to use it. And look how far we've come. Now we have our own personal desktop computers. With Desert Storm, I was a new contract specialist. I had graduated from the contracting internship, and I was working hazardous waste contracts. And it really, I saw an impact on disposition services and DLA as a whole. We had been providing support to customers predominantly more at home in times of peace. And so our level of contracting support grew exponentially. We started writing contracts for the disposal of waste that our soldiers abroad generated. So it went from mainly a CONUS operation, and not just for contracting, for all of disposition services. At that time was DPDS, I believe, yeah. And providing that contingency support that's so important and needed. They need it. It's a environment that, is ever-changing, and so we needed to be flexible. So it also called for some more flexibility in contracting, which is a pretty stringent environment. And so some of the challenges for us was, how can we provide the warfighters what they need, when they need, but still be legally compliant? And so being able to go with the changes and bring in that flexibility was key. So that's something, and now it's pretty common day that we have CONUS support, as we're a global footprint. Mid-2000s, we had a contract for hazardous waste disposal out of Iraq as a result of the ongoing war. And oftentimes disposition services were called in at the tail end of a conflict, and such was the case. And so we were writing contracts to dispose of the warfighters' generated hazardous waste and material. And one of the most challenging items to dispose of was lithium batteries. And because waste has to be moved through different countries, the Basel Convention applies. And that can be a very drawn-out, time-consuming process because you have to get all the countries that have touch points agree to having waste moved through it. Unfortunately, Iraq and Pakistan could not come to an agreement, and so our contractor had to arrange for airlift for the lithium batteries, and it was a logistical nightmare, but we prevailed, and for those batteries, it cost a little over $1 million to airlift those and have them disposed of. EBOLA, when I became the J7 director, one of the actions going on was OUA, Liberia. We had the Ebola crisis there. And so our contractor, again, we were called in at the tail end of the challenge, and so we had a contract for scrap that was generated, but then we also had a contract for the hazardous waste. And that was a little bit more drawn out too, because while we're trying to get the Basel approval for all the different countries, and we're dealing with third world countries, we had to help arrange for storage of the waste, and that can be also challenging, trying to find adequate storage facilities that meet U.S. criteria in a third world country. KWAJALEIN, that's an atoll in the Pacific where scrap had been building up for decades. And we were called upon a few years back. We wrote a contract for the removal of literally tons and tons of scrap. And through our contract assistance and the great folks of Disposition Services that work out in the field that provided oversight and assistance, we cleaned up that area, and it was a real celebration for KWAJALEIN and the government because, number one, it employed locals, and it helped clean up their backyard. It no longer was an eyesore, so we helped make their world a better place. For the pandemic, it's pretty much our public sales, they really stepped up to the plate. When the pandemic first hit, masks were in short supply, so we pulled masks back from one of our sales contractors. We froze those items, pulled them back, and so they got into the right hands and helped DLA with that relief effort. And also there was some immediate impact on a few of our hazardous waste contractors in the real hot spots. Those contractors did not want to go in there and perform, and we couldn't hold them accountable because this was something none of us had ever expected. And so we were able to work emergency contract support and to get that waste removed by alternate contracts, by modifying other existing regional hazardous waste contracts. And as a result, that waste was removed timely and safely, so the base commander was not fined, and they can be fined upwards of $75,000 a day for certain Resource Conservation and Recovery Act waste if it's not moved in a short timeline. I just feel extremely blessed and grateful that as a senior at the local high school, I had an opportunity to start working here. It really changed my life. It provided me a financial means to get a college degree, even though I qualified for financial aid. I needed more, and my loving family just couldn't provide that. So because of working here, I was able to do that, and then after I got hired in full-time, I was able to go back through the tuition assistance program and also get subsequent college degree. So I'm extremely loyal and thankful for that opportunity to be employed at such a great organization because it really changed my life. And in turn, when I retire sometime in the future, I want to continue giving and pass on that mantle to the next generation of leaders that are more than capable. I'm very proud of them.